Welcome back to Advanced Java. In this video, I'd like to give an overview of how our code reviews will work, including signups, expectations for that process for both you and for me, and then the final submission process for the project. So there's information about projects and the project submission and project code review process in two places. The first place is in the syllabus underneath projects, and there's details here about the number of points, how grading will be done, and the takeaway from this is that we'll be doing in-person code reviews, whether those are face-to-face, where you come into campus and we meet one-on-one and walk through your code, or whether we do that using a WebEx, so using a screen share. But we will be doing a live code review for each of the 4 projects. The details there I'm going to leave to you. There is one exception to the process that I'm going to talk about here, and that is the very last project. It is due the Wednesday of finals week, and basically just due to the short time frame for me to turn final grades around. When we meet for your code review at the end of the semester, whatever you have at code review time, you'll be code complete, so there won't be an opportunity to make changes after the code review. You do have opportunity to make changes after code review for the first 3 projects, and I'll talk more about that as we go through the formal process. Projects are not submitted in Blackboard. They are only in GitHub, and you'll use Git tags to indicate the different stages or different parts in that process. So we'll talk more about Git tagging, but just be aware that when we sit down to code review, you should have your project tagged for code review. And then once you have made any changes that came out of code review, we'll tag it. You will tag it again for a second time now for final approval. So it'd be v1.0 for final approval. Sometimes students make a mistake and you need to re-tag it. At that point, you can just increase the minor number. So it'd be like v1.1 for final approval. Like you forgot to include a screenshot or something like that. You can just increase that minor version number. After I've taken a look at that, then you will tag a third time, which is for final. And some students wonder why I want you tagging so many times. And essentially, that's almost like a point in time snapshot of what your code looked like. And so that helps me to compare from one time to another. And it also provides you with an easy way to go back if you're like, gosh, what did I do between the code review and when I submitted for final approval? You can easily see those differences here. It also kind of stamps your project. Because we're not submitting in Blackboard, there's not this submission that we can go and look at. But here with that tag, we're able to see exactly what the code looked like at that point in time. So in terms of determining whether a project was on time or late, those tags are used for that as well. There's a separate video about tagging your project and tagging your labs. So I'm going to assume that you've already watched that video and you've been tagging your stuff all along, so I won't go into tagging here. There's details here about penalties for being late, etc. And I'm going to talk more about that in the more detailed code review process, which you can find here in the main menu. But I just wanted to really highlight that there's 2 different places where there's information. So really getting into the nitty-gritty of the code review process here. First thing is to schedule time with me for that code review. And I've got a Google document out here that you guys all have or should have write access to. So you can use this document to choose your time when we're going to meet. So I've got several different times scheduled, and you can choose whether that code review is going to be in person, meaning that you're coming onto campus and we'll sit side by side and take a look at your code, or whether you'd like to do a WebEx. And if you schedule a WebEx, then what I'll do is send you a link. Sometimes I just put the link right off to the right-hand margin here in terms of where to actually access that. So keep an eye on that. I may also include a phone number there in case I know that I might be having issues with sound. Sometimes the WebEx is better just if we do a phone call and then a screen share on the computer. You can test out your environment or your computer. If you do want to do a WebEx, make sure that you've got a microphone that's working. We don't have to have a video camera on. I'm just going to worry about the screen sharing portion, but we do need to be able to talk. So verify that your system requirements meet the WebEx requirements there. So that's it. If none of these times work for you, I can schedule something else, but please let me know that at least a week in advance. So don't come to me on Wednesday, the day the code review is due, and say, oh, I can't make it today. You want to make sure you're scheduling that stuff out well in advance, okay? So if you're asking for an alternate code review time, please do that a week in advance, okay? And you can message me in Slack for that. All right, so you've got your code review scheduled. Let's come back here. What happens before code review? Well, you've written your entire project, all the tests are passing, you're getting the proper output, and you've documented your code, so it does need to be Java docked. So essentially your code complete, right? Everything is working, and you can imagine in industry, this would be kind of that last step before we go to production, before you actually deploy this out for your users. So you want to tag your project at that point to indicate, okay, this is the state of the code when we code reviewed. So again, separate video for tagging, but make sure you tag that before we sit down to code review. At code review time, I schedule these, as you could see in that schedule, pretty close together. So you really need to be ready at code review time, not saying, oh, I've got one more test to pass, or I still need to Java dock my code. I'm not going to code review if you're not entirely ready at code review time. So arrive early, make sure your VM is up and running. If you've got a laptop that you're using for your code that has your VM on it, make sure you're bringing that in. So you're actually going to run the code on your VM. All right, so what does the code review format look like? So first, I'll start off by having you show me in GitHub that your project is tagged. So make sure you look in GitHub, make sure that that tag actually got pushed up. Then we'll also take a quick look at your Git commit count. Remember that there is a minimum number of commits for the semester, so you want to make sure you're hitting about 25 to 30 per project. And if you're regularly committing a couple of times on every single lab and many times in your project work, you should have absolutely no problem hitting this. And in fact, a lot of times students have, double or even triple of what I'm expecting there. So the thing is, just make sure you're committing regularly. As soon as you've got a little few lines of code, it's working, you don't want to lose it, commit that. Next, I'll have you demonstrate that all the unit tests work. Now, unit tests must pass in order for us to do code review. If a test isn't passing, that means your code's not done. Something is not right yet. So you have got to make sure those tests are passing. If you're having trouble getting a test to pass, post in Slack. I'm happy to help. Your peers are happy to help. So don't wait until code review time to solve any of those problems. Do that ahead of time. After you show that all the tests are passing, then I'll have you demonstrate error handling. So things like checking the number of command line arguments. What if you pass in too many? What if you don't pass in any? Does the program give an appropriate error message for that? If you send in a file that doesn't exist, do you get back a good error message for that? Do you see a nice stack trace? That type of thing. So test that out ahead of time, make sure it's working. Next up, then we'll have you demonstrate the program's happy path. So that means run on the big file that I've provided to you in Slack and make sure that that code executes without error. It should run fairly quickly. I would say 10 seconds at the very most for project 1. So if your program is taking a minute to run, you've got an opportunity for some performance improvement on that. Make sure that the output meets the requirements. So make sure that all of the, your output is going to the output file, for example, or the output directory, for example. Make sure that you've got the proper numbers in there. So I'll share with you how many, what the token count should be on that big file. So make sure that you're meeting that. Make sure you're getting rid of the empty tokens, all of those kinds of details in terms of output meeting requirements and that it's correct. And when it says be sure you can prove the correct values for your large file, I'm providing that for you, and I will tell you what the token count number should be. So if I forget to provide that, just ask. I'll post that on into Slack, but ask and help if I forget to do that or you're a little bit ahead of me and I haven't put it out there yet. Then I'll have you step through the code. So starting with the main method, explain the flow and the logic of the program. So this demonstrates your knowledge of the code, I'll ask you maybe why some of the design decisions were made the way you made them. And that's not an attack, it's just to get you used to talking through code in a technical way, because in industry you'll be doing code reviews like this on a pretty regular basis. While we're going through that code, I'll also be kind of looking over your shoulder to make sure all the coding standards are met and that you've documented every constructor and every method, including any abstract methods in the interface. Once we're through all of that, then I'll have you show me the generated JavaDoc for the program. And there's a lab 9, I believe, in the unit. We'll be practicing with generating JavaDoc in our environment this semester, so you have some practice with that. Next, we will discuss your academic integrity statement. So that should show me all of your references, any resources that you used, anybody that you consulted with, and that's outside of the regular course materials, right? So if you Googled something about date formatting, for example, I expect that you've got the actual link here and maybe an explanation of what exactly you used out of that link. So that should be all in your academic integrity statement. Throughout this process, I'll be providing feedback on things that need to be changed. And generally what that ends up being in these projects are best practices. Maybe a method is a little bit too long and we want to refactor that so that the method is single purpose. Usually there's not any major changes here. The code is generally pretty solid. If you've written a good project, the tests are passing, you've got the proper output, you shouldn't expect that there's a lot that's going to come out of this. So there will probably be a few things that you can improve upon. So as we're going through all of that stuff, my expectation is that you're taking notes and writing down those changes. So make sure you come prepared to do that, either whether that's paper and pencil or you've got a document open on your computer to take those notes in. After the code review, your job is to then implement all of these changes that we talked about, whatever they are. You'll have a changelog document in your project. That's in the docs directory. So document what you did, what changes you made after code review, and then you'll commit, push, and tag for final approval. And then let me know when that's ready, and then I will review it. Assuming that you hit the mark there, we'll go ahead and have you tag for final. And that's your kind of final submission, and then you're on to the next project. So in terms of tips, there's an article here that talks about kind of clean coding practices and things to watch for in terms of code quality. I'd recommend that you read that as a way to start thinking about how do we get our code really to a nice, maintainable, professional level. So that's a good reference to use. Okay, so I do have a rubric for the analyzer, and there are going to be web aspects of the projects as well. As we move into units 2, 3, and 4, there'll be a separate rubric for that. So the rubric here is for analyzer, the analyzer portion of the project. That's the entire project in unit 1, and then the analyzer portion in unit 2 and 3. So expectations at code review are that the application compiles, runs, no syntax errors, no runtime errors, all the unit tests pass. You can see what the deductions are here. I've mentioned before, please don't come into code review with failed tests, but if it happens, there are deductions for that, -5 for one failed test, and then that number will increase based on the number of failing tests. Correct output, if your program has the correct output, as I've noted in Slack, shouldn't be any problems here at all. Deductions if things are off, if your numbers are off, etc. The program should meet all coding standards. It should be tagged and pushed to GitHub. So sometimes students tag and forget to push the tag to GitHub. Make sure that you've got that done before code review time and before you tag for final approval, and when you tag for final, make sure that those tags always get pushed up. I'll come back and talk about electronic reviews in just a bit. In terms of JavaDoc documentation should be complete at code review time as well. Deductions if it's not complete, and again, depends on the severity. I've also talked about that changelog, keeping track of what you change in your project from the time that we sit down and have code review to when you submit for final approval. Make sure that that changelog is complete and accurate. And then your academic integrity statement should be complete as well. One note, the changelog won't have anything in it when we sit down at code review time. So this item here is when you tag for final approval, that making sure you've got that changelog complete. In terms of timeliness, in-person code review needs to be completed before the code review deadline, as indicated on the syllabus and also in the sign-up sheet for the code reviews or sign-up document. Program basically needs to be code complete by the project due date. Code complete means all the changes discussed in code review are complete, tagged, and pushed to, I only need one, oh, there, I'll fix that up, to GitHub. Penalties for all of those missed items are here on the right-hand side. One thing that I did skip past is electronic reviews. An electronic review is if for some reason you maybe didn't finish on time or something came up, whatever the case is, if you end up doing an electronic review, that means I'll review your code in GitHub offline, so we won't actually meet and talk face-to-face. There is a deduction for not doing a face-to-face or in-person code review, and that's listed down here. If you do opt for that for whatever reason, you will need to include screenshots demonstrating all aspects of the project. So showing that the code compiles, showing that your unit tests all pass, showing all of the error handling, screenshots showing all of the output, so each output file. So there'll be a fairly significant number of screenshots if you opt for an electronic review. So this is making sure that that stuff is all included. If you have any questions, you're doing an electronic review and you have questions about exactly what to include, please ask. All right. So if you have questions about any of the deductions here, please ask about that. I've also got the rubric for the web here, so I'm just going to point out that it exists. I probably won't come back and specifically talk about this before the units 2, 3, and 4, but just keep in mind that that is here as well, and refer to that before we sit down for code review for those too. All right, so I think that should cover everything in terms of signups, expectations, how the code review process works, and then the submission process, which is essentially tagging and pushing everything up to GitHub. So everything will happen up in GitHub. I'll communicate back with you about approvals and that kind of thing as an issue in GitHub, just like you're seeing with your labs. All right, that's it for now. We'll see you next time.